Well, I'm joined today by a very special guest. It's Neil Stubley, who's the head of, get this right, Courts and Horticulture for All England Lawn Tennis Club. Hi, Neil. How are you?
Very well, Scott. How are you? Very well.
Not too bad at all. I mean, it's the question we all ask now, and we take it more seriously than we used to ask it. So it really is, how are you, and how's the rest of the team, and how safe have everybody managed to be over the last 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in a way, because we're a hands-on sort of industry, we've had to come in and we're working outside. So there is a degree of normality, to be fair with the team. There's always that sort of nervousness about social distancing and doing the right thing, which we're constantly having to do and monitor and follow government guidelines like everybody else. But I think we had for 2020, believe it or not, we had a really good spring and summer. So we ended up doing a lot of the stuff that we were kind of being able to do outside, and we weren't stuck indoors too much. Obviously, this winter's been a little bit more difficult with lockdowns and stuff, and doing bare essentials and just managing and maintaining where we need to. But again, we've kind of turned that corner now. The days are starting to draw out again, and we're kind of getting focused now for the start of the grass court season.
Did COVID get close? Does any of the team go down with it? Maybe they'd be self-isolating or anything like that. Did you manage to keep away from that sort of thing?
Well, we're quite fortunate that we're actually spread over quite a big site. So we're a 42-acre site, and most of the staff at the club have been working from home. so we've got extra rooms and facilities. So we've come out of it really well. Really well indeed. We've had, I think, one person in the team that went down with it that had been, quite fortunately, had been away for a few days beforehand before he tested positive, and again his symptoms were fairly mild. So yeah, we've done okay out of it.
Did you feel the weight of responsibility being the manager to a large team to keep everybody safe, and what sort of mitigations and procedures have you put in place to make life that little bit safer for everyone?
Yeah, so we've just used extra rest areas that we'd probably use during the summer, and we've just sort of spread people out. So normally in the winter, we'd sort of revert back to one main mess room and all the team work out of one. And then in the summer, when we get our seasonal staff, we then start to spread and open up extra sort of bivvies and rest areas. So all we've done is since we went into lockdown last March, we've just kept all of those bivvies open, and we've just split teams up to sort of not mix. So we've had like different sort of rest times and lunch times, and we've just made sure that as safe as we can be with working practices. If we ever did get a situation where we got COVID in the group or people had to self-isolate, it was only ever going to be a small amount of the team, because we'd managed to separate them all. So yeah, we've been fortunate like that. And again, I think it's just a case of just staying a little bit grounded and just realizing the enormity of what's happening, out there, and just making sure that as long as each individual's taking responsibility and doing the right thing, making sure you're washing your hands and you're social distancing and making sure that we're doing the right thing, then in theory, everybody else should be safe, because if you're doing the right thing, then everybody is. So yeah, and I think it's just new ways of working, the ways that we haven't done before, that you have to keep taking stock of. You stop, you listen, you think about what you're doing, and then just kind of, because it's not second nature, because by nature we want to sort of gather in groups and socialize and stuff. So not being able to do that has been difficult as well.
Do you think many of the procedures that you brought in you'll retain when we get back to some sort of normality, the washing down the machines and all that sort of business? Do you think it's things that are that you've seen that maybe do have currency long term?
I think we've always been quite fairly good on that sort of thing. We've always had a good ways of working, I think, with cleanliness and working down and with machinery and stuff. And we're quite fortunate that the main area where we store most of our stuff is fairly recent anyway. It's within the last 10 years of being built, so it's quite modern anyway, rather than a bit of an ad hoc sort of area. I think some of the different ways of working, where you'd normally potentially do group talks in the morning about job lists and things like that, we've kind of done smaller groups and done sort of the day before, releasing it on Teams as a group chat about jobs for the following day, and then you can sort of liaise with the smaller groups and sort of, you know, just do different ways of working there, which I think, you know, will end up being slightly a part of the norm. But again, being a summer sport, being outside, it just means that a lot of the things by default that we do, you're socially distancing. You know, all the championship courts are individual courts. They're all hand cut, so there is the ability to sort of social distance and stuff just by the nature of the job, really.
Did you have anybody furloughed over the period, or did you have a full team throughout?
No, we pretty much kept everyone on. When we first went into the first lockdown, you know, for the first sort of month, the championships were still going to be on, so we were still gearing for that. And then within a few months, you knew that the club itself would be opening in again with on different tiers and restrictions and stuff. So we've been quite strangely a fairly busy summer with our members. You know, some of our, you know, members that might be working abroad or working a lot more than normal, that have, you know, probably worked from home, had a little bit more time on their hands, that have ended up, you know, driving to the club and using it a bit more. So we ended up having quite a busy summer with just members play rather than sort of tournament play. But again, some of the smaller tournaments obviously didn't happen as well through the summer as it sort of rolled through. So
I think very similar to the golf situation, that because golf was a sport like tennis, that you can play socially distanced, that it's seen a little bit of a boom. So in that regard, it's probably it kept the club buzzing a little bit. Maybe not so much the food and beverage in the locker rooms, but the courts themselves.
Absolutely, because you've got a net that divides everybody. It sort of forces you to social distance anyway. So it was just getting around the ways of how you pick up the tennis balls, and, you know, whether you'd put your own initials on the balls or you wore a glove. You know, the little things that different people brought to the, you know, how they wanted to play, just to sort of make sure that they stayed safe.
A bit like golf. I mean, the only big change is you can't touch the pin. So I've always putted with the pin in for the last 6 months, which is a small price to pay, but I'm sure it's cost me a few whole putts, I must admit.
And I think one thing I liked about seeing on Twitter is kind of all these new inventions of how to get the balls out of the cups and stuff. So again, by default, there's new ways of working and new sort of machinery and gadgets coming on the market that people just hadn't thought about in the past because they hadn't had to. You then rethink things, and I'm sure some of these things will be staying with us, you know, once we get this under control.
Now, I know you were the only Grand Slam played in a natural surface, so moving the date would have been virtually impossible. But did you get a bit frustrated that the other 3 Grand Slams managed to fulfill their fixtures last year and you guys didn't?
Not really. Again, it's one of those things that because we are a finite surface and we're a summer sport, there's only a very short window that we could have been able to move it in. And because as part of the championship planning, it starts quite early, you have to make it, sometimes you have to make that early call. And because we were kind of in the midst of it last year, sort of when the club made the decision early April that the championships wasn't going to happen last year, that was purely on the fact that you couldn't plan for it anyway, because it was that first wave. You just didn't know when it was going to stop. Whereas I guess for the other Grand Slams, because they could have that flexibility, it was slightly later in the year. The French were in a position that they could move it and still present their services. It just meant that they was in a position they could. But we was always going to have a very short window, and it was discussed about whether, you know, you push it back a week or 2 weeks. But again, back then when the decision had to be made, you couldn't guarantee that by pushing it back 2 weeks, you could guarantee the tournament. So there was no point delaying it when you didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And even now, you look at the Australian Open, you know, nearly a year after the pandemic started, they've even still got their challenges to sort of, you know, how they were going to deliver it and stuff. So I think it was, you look back and you realize that the decision that was made was the right one made, because the sort of the future was so uncertain that you just couldn't commit to anything back then.
I think you're right, but we all measure the start of summer, by Wimbledon. So we all felt it, but you guys must have felt it to such a more acute level, because it is such a big deal for you guys. So it must have been a real downer for you and the rest of the team.
It was, and you kind of, and I think sometimes in adversity, you kind of find out how good a team is. And there was that that initial low for the first week or so that, the championship wasn't on, and all the hard work for the last sort of 6 or 8 months almost felt like it was to sort of no avail. But then all of a sudden it kind of dawned on us that, we still got the rest of the summer, and there could be, you just didn't know what sort of play you're going to have, whether it was just members play or some sort of smaller tournaments could sort of come in that we would normally have throughout a normal summer. So everybody was then refocused again, and we ended up having a very busy grass court season. We got to renovation stage. That renovation had to be just as thorough than it had been in the previous years, purely because we had to get ready for 2021. So it was a strange year, but again, it kind of it was one of those years where you could reevaluate how you felt about the championships. If you've been doing a lot of championships like myself, it would have been my 25th championships. To not have one, it just brought home how much you would miss it if you weren't involved in them anymore. So I think everybody's kind of is reinvigorated, ready for 2021. Having missed one, they're realizing how special they are and how much a part of our lives they've been, that I think everybody's even more determined this year to make sure that they're the very best.
So that gold watch for 25 Wimbledons will have to wait till next year then.
I was going to say, it's unfortunate. We'll have to wait another year, but there we go.
I was thinking about it before speaking to you, Neil. Has there been an upside? Does it allow you to try a few things out in the courts when there wasn't the same pressure of TV cameras around, just to see how maybe new procedures may have worked out in the courts? Did you take that chance?
Not really. I mean, to be honest, we've got a well thought out working way of doing things, and if we ever look at anything, they're always little tweaks and things like that. So I think one of the things we kind of looked at was what the nutrient level needs to be like in the lead up to a championships and stuff, but there was discussion about whether we needed to sort of look at that and stuff. But at the end of the day, because we weren't drying down the courts ready for the championships and the covers weren't in and stuff like that, we couldn't get to the courts to the standard that they needed to be for championships play, and I mean things like hardness readings and getting them sort of as hard as they do, because the covers weren't in. So we couldn't really test anything out and get proper feedback and stuff like that from it. So the focus really was just trying to put on the best grass courts for the grass court season that we could, and just make sure that we were kind of fully committed to the renovation season. We had reduced seasonal staff in 2020, just because for traveling around for overseas people was reduced. So we ended up having less than we normally would have for the playing season. So it just meant that the staff that we did have had to be a little bit more focused, because there was a little bit more work to do. But again, it kind of shone through from the team that nobody ever really complained. They just got on with it and sort of delivered it and just said, well, that's the job. Doesn't matter whether the world sees our courts or not. We need to know that they're the best in the world, even if anyone else can't see them. So that's the mentality of the team. And and like I say, we had a really good summer.
The courts, and I'm thinking about the main courts that maybe don't get the same play, do they suffer from not having had 2 weeks of intense play on them? Do they soften up because of that?
Not really. I guess at the end of the playing season, whether one court got more play than the other, and it was quite ironic that we got to the end of the grass court season and most of the baselines were completely still intact, just because we had so many grass courts and we had the ability to sort of move them around so we could get a good wear. But again, once we start renovation, we're not repairing from the damage from that season. We're actually getting them ready for the following season. So whether they've had play on them or not, you know, we would rip into them as much as we would do on any other season. So the renovation that we done back in August and September was exactly the same as previous years, and we've just stuck to those same principles going through autumn, winter this year. And yeah, so once spring comes, whatever spring brings this year, will tell us what we can't do. So we're in a good place. We're kind of where we need to be in February, ready for sort of our March, early April sort of spring prep work that sort of really starts in earnest. And yeah, we're kind of looking forward to a year with the championships.
Talking about the championships, obviously the vaccine's around, so it's a light at the end of the tunnel. What are your thoughts about this year's championships? Have you got any concerns, or is it all systems go?
No, we're all systems go. We're working to sort of the three scenarios of a full capacity normal championships, a reduced capacity, and a behind closed doors. And it's those three scenarios that each team within the club are working towards, just to sort of see what we need to do. And we're kind of working to that middle one, that it's going to be a reduced capacity. You know, in the next 5 months, do I think that everybody will be vaccinated and the infection rates will be low enough that everybody won't have to social distance and we can do what we want? I doubt it. Do I think we'll be in lockdown and behind closed doors? I don't think that either. So I think it'll be somewhere in the middle. There'll be a reduced capacity, and I guess we'll be led by sort of government guidelines and DCMS and what those rules are for elite sports and who's allowed in, what sort of capacity crowds, and we'll be guided by them really. But again, we're 5 months away, so it's very hard to know to an exact what that reduced capacity would look like.
We are all working in situations that none of us have ever faced before, and who'd have thought it a year ago? It's incredible. But I think this year, 2021, if sport does go ahead, the level, all the events that are supposed to go ahead, Ryder Cups, Olympics, Euro football, it'll be an astonishing year if we get some sport on the go, and Wimbledon's a very key part of all that.
Yeah, and I'm really hopeful that globally all of these sports will get back to some form of normality, at least being staged to a degree of what normality can be for each event. But I guess in our industry, in the sports turf world, if a tournament's on, whether it be tennis or the football or the Olympics or whatever it is, I guess our jobs are almost, what you've got to do, because whether you're, certainly for us, if we're playing behind a closed doors or to a reduced capacity or a full capacity, it doesn't really change for the ground staff. It's, you're playing on the same amount of courts. They need to be covered. They need to be prepped and cut and marked. So it doesn't really change for us. It's more for other people that it becomes a challenge for. So I think in our world, and again, you can sort of probably say the same for the Open this year, whether that's reduced capacity or not, what the green staff have to do there won't change. It will be as full on and as intense as it needs to be. So I think we're quite fortunate with that we almost know what we need to do from this early stage. And so we don't have to do too much scenario planning apart from the weather.
Yeah,
which we get every year anyway. So
what have you learned about yourself over the last 12 months?
Oh dear.
A left field question there.
Yeah, well, I think you probably appreciate how intense our jobs all are, because even though we've had a reduced year, I've certainly had more reflection time of sort of how we do things and the intensity and stuff. And but it kind of reinvigorates you more than anything. You realize how much you miss it. You always sort of think, oh, I wonder, when I retire or if I ever leave, will I miss working here? And but you could never find out until either you retire or you leave. Whereas I think we've had that fortunate scenario that in 2020 we know how we would feel if we didn't have the championships, because we didn't. So I can speak for myself to say that I would have missed it, and I did miss it greatly. Just the buzz about it, the pressure, the challenge of, you know, working with Mother Nature and never quite knowing what those last few weeks when you're kind of doing the final prep work, how things are going to change and how flexible you have to be. So I've certainly missed that. I probably haven't missed the pressure of the media scrutiny and stuff like that. But again, that's sort of, you know, that comes with the territory, and, you know, certainly looking forward to it this year. But I think it's just one of those calm before the storm years, that for the job that you're doing, I think, you know, you kind of have to put it into context with what was going on in the world, and just realizing that, you know, sport, as important it is to people, you know, took a back seat, rightly so. And it's about making things safe, and people were adhering to rules, and we were doing the rules ourselves. But yeah, again, I think it's one of those ones where you're just chomping at the bit to get going again, really.
I think the difference between this lockdown and the first lockdown is the fact that on the TVs we have had sport, which has given us a little bit of sanity. But it's quite something. That have you any thoughts for the people maybe further down the pyramid who are maybe got concerns about their jobs and working with restricted budgets because the money's not been there? You're maybe in a position where you can see the whole industry and have a thought
Sure.
on the rest of the guys out there.
Yeah, unfortunately, we are in one of those industries that's always run on tight budgets and minimal staff. And unfortunately, being in the leisure industry, they tend to be the first industry where budgets get capped and things get closed. And so it is a worrying time of, you know, what is the long-term effect. I don't think we're really feeling it too much short-term effect at the moment, because I think there's a lot of, you know, as much support out there as possibly can be from government and stuff. But once all that finishes, it'll be interesting to see what lies, you know, out there. And I think it's probably more from like the Sunday league stuff, the small tennis clubs, the small golf sort of cricket clubs that are kind of managed voluntarily by themselves. It's these sort of places where, you know, you fear that things are going to really happen. So but again, within our industry where we can support it, then hopefully we can.
Two more questions. First one, what is it you're most looking forward to doing once the restrictions are lifted? What one thing? It doesn't even have to be work-wise.
I think just getting back into some sort of normality, really, and just sort of, you know, again, we've been quite fortunate here that we still have been coming into work, so there has always been that degree of normality. But I think just trying to get, you know, that collaboration with work colleagues, that's the one thing that I've probably missed the most, is that the fact that most meetings now, like this one today, it's either on Teams or Zoom, and whereas normally you could sort of come to the club and conduct this interview whilst walking the grounds and show people what you're trying to explain to them. Whereas, you know, a lot of the meetings, well, all of my meetings that have been held since last March have all been via a laptop within the different departments, and, you know, speaking to them, that, you know, some of the guys in IT and in finance and stuff literally haven't been on site since last March. And it's really hard for me to understand how they must be feeling, because I've been coming in, and at the same time, you know, I try and put myself in their position to sort of try and do your job from home for the last 12 months. Again, must be so frustrating and difficult. So I think I'm just looking forward to kind of my colleagues kind of coming back to work, and we can kind of have that face-to-face collaboration again. And just, you know, that's pretty much and I think that's probably just because humans are naturally sort of creatures that are sociable. And I think, you know, people being locked away and stuff, it's kind of, you know, mental health and stuff like that is really coming to the fore in the last sort of 12 months.
Right. Last question. does the club still have croquet involved in its title?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. What's the physiology of a croquet lawn? What is it? What's a croquet lawn all about? Is it just a cut grass, or what do you do to produce a croquet court?
Yeah. So
Lawn.
a good croquet lawn is pretty much sort of maintained the same as you would a golf green, really, and they've got their own special croquet style stimp meter for a certain true running lawn and stuff. So yeah, our 3 croquet lawns are kind of like sort of hybrid lawns where they double up as tennis courts as well, so in blocks of 2, so we can get full-size croquet lawns on 3 of our double blocks of practice courts. And outside of the championships, they're year-round croquet, or for the summer, should I say. And then we just take them back as tennis courts for the championship, so they kind of get used for both. So again, it's quite interesting to sort of try and produce 2 different surfaces with the same sort of seed mix and soil and stuff, and just trying to adapt it to sort of do both sports. But we do have a very active croquet section here at the club, and they kind of have their lawns from sort of April through to the end of September, and they're quite widely used by the membership. So it's
maybe need to do an article on a croquet lawn. The physiology.
Yeah, well, the weird thing is that even now, croquet is one of those sports that I think if you know it really well, it's probably quite an easy sport to understand and with the rules and stuff. But even after being here for 25 years, I can sometimes be watching our members playing croquet and try and think about what their next shot might be. And then they do something completely different, and I just don't understand why they've done it. So it's one of those rules that it's just really difficult that I don't understand. But there's a couple of different versions. So there's like a golf croquet, which is almost like it's like croquet's version of cricket's sort of T20, where it's fast and it's quick, and it's kind of designed to get sort of more people playing it, and it's instead of it being a 3 or 4 hour game, it ends up being like a 1 hour game, and you can just sort of play it a lot more. So maybe I should.
Television companies coming calling to televise croquet.
Oh well, I'm not so sure how popular that sport will become, but it's more of a social weekend thing, I think, rather than a bit like the bowls, I think.
Anyway, Neil, thank you very much for giving us a little bit of your time today, and it's great to hear what's gone on over the last 12 months and the preparations that are going into the coming championships this summer, and fingers crossed that everything goes well and we do get some crowds in there to ooh and ah the wonderful tennis that's on display. So thank you very much again, and keep well, and pass on my best wishes to the rest of the team.
I will. Cheers. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you all in the summer.